Alright, so I know people are going to be going in and out today, but some important stuff to cover. So I have this document I'm working on having to do with thesis statements. I'm going to add an additional example to it, and I'm going to send it out. And I'm also recording this for future reference. But yeah, this will be one of the most important things, in fact, I can teach you for this entire course, and that is the importance of a thesis statement and what a thesis statement is. So I'm curious how many people think they know what a thesis statement is. Raise your hand. Know a few, pretty much everybody. Okay, so let's see. Lawrence, can you tell us what a thesis statement is?
Thesis statement is like a brief about what you are going to analyze in this essay.
Sort of. Yeah, I mean, yes, that's partly right?
For example, a thesis statement might be that the author conveys what kinds of themes does the author discusses in this text through the use of what literary approaches or literary techniques.
Yeah, that kind of thing. So yeah, usually literary approaches, authorial choices, techniques, those things are incorporated into it. And then you're introducing, the specific area of focus, right, that you're going to analyze, as you said. There's one crucial aspect that you maybe implied but didn't state outright. Anyone know what we would add here, Odysseus?
In my point of view, like the thesis statement you mentioned, like the major conclusion, or what we call like the main point of the essay, and then the subpoints which support the conclusion.
Yeah, so it can preview subpoints, right? And these might have to do with like different literary techniques or different pieces of evidence, right, for your main claim. But yeah, it's a kind of conclusion, right? You say it's the conclusion or it's the main point. We think of the conclusion as coming at the end, right? But in an essay, often the conclusion is really just summarizing ideas that you already explored in the essay and that you already previewed or stated outright at the beginning, right? So that's ideal, that's what we're looking for. We want the conclusion that what we've decided, our interpretation, our claim about this text, right there front and center, summarized in 1 or 2 sentences, usually in the first paragraph. Claim. What is distinct about a claim?
It has to be opinionated.
So it has to be, it has to be based on your opinion or interpretation. So what's the difference between an opinion and an interpretation and a fact? So The Black Cat was written by Edgar Allan Poe. This is not a thesis statement. It's a fact. What's the difference between that and a claim, an opinion, and interpretation?
So my opinion is I think the Black Cat is poorly written, for example. That's an opinion.
Yeah, so that would be an opinion. Although it's not the kind of thing that we would normally say in the thesis statement, right? Because it doesn't have to do with interpretation. It only has to do with your feeling. So it is an opinion in a sense, but it's an opinion that is based on interpreting something about the text's meaning or how it achieves certain effects, whether you think it's good or not, right? So what's the difference between that and a fact?
Someone could disagree.
Yeah, someone has to disagree. Someone has to be able, or people have to be able to disagree with what you said. Someone needs to be able to have, potentially, a completely different interpretation of the story, or an interpretation that is different in some crucial way, right? So we see an example of this in the 2 different essays I sent out in response to The Black Cat, okay? Which we're going to look at in a minute, but this is the point. Needs to be something that one could argue with. So for instance here, thesis statement, also known as a central argument, main argument, or points. It will reflect a specific area of focus. We are going to use thesis statements in pretty much all literary writing. They are essential for paper 2, which is what the midterm is going to be. So they're also essential for the HL essay, which we're going to do at least one of, more likely two. They are also, when you do the IL, even though it's not a written task, you kind of have a thesis statement there as well. For paper one, according to the letter of the law, they're not required, but then if you look at examples, the ones that score well pretty much always have some kind of thesis statement. And at the university level, every single essay you write is based on a thesis, and that applies to literature as well as other classes, right? So this is why I say it's one of the most important things I can teach you how to do. This is pretty similar in some ways to the essays you've written before, I would imagine. It's a little bit different than some of the homework assignments I've given, which only kind of give you the first step. So I ask questions about the Cask of Amontillado, like discuss the role of narratives technique in this story, right? So then what you guys have done for the most part in the responses is just kind of write about various aspects of narrative technique and kind of how they're used or how they function in the plot. But so you've understood how those things work, but a thesis statement goes one step further and makes a specific interpretation. Okay, narrative structure has these features and kind of functions in this way, and then you're going to make some claim about them and how they contribute to the reader's understanding or the way the author achieves a certain meaning. Right? Make them all follow one specific point. So for instance, you may see a prompt like this on the midterm. With reference to at least two texts we have studied, discuss the tone and the effects it creates in each work, right? So this is one of those literary elements I told you may be asked about in the midterm. So let's say you chose Alice. Well, you have to do Alice, but you chose to compare Alice with the Cask of Amontillado. Your thesis statement could be something like this, almost a thesis paragraph, which is sometimes the case. The narrator's wry tone towards a major character in each text. Wry means what? You remember? Dry humor, but a specific kind of dry humor. Yeah, because we could just say dry tone, although that wouldn't necessarily imply humor, I guess.
A bit twisted.
A little bit.
Expression of disgust, disappointment, or annoyance.
Disgust, disappointment, or annoyance? It's extreme, I would say.
Yeah, but like that describes the person's face or features, not types.
Oh, okay, that's a person's face or feature, so how about a tone, right tone?
Mocking, is that?
Mocking, to some degree, yeah. Somewhat mocking humor. So the narrator's wry tone towards a major character in each text, Alice and Fortunato, artfully divides the reader's sympathies between the narrator and said character, creating an initial distance between the reader and the character, which closes as the text progresses. This by itself is pretty much the thesis statement, but then we have this little addition for emphasis. By the end, both our level of sympathy with and our understanding of the character have markedly shifted, causing us to reevaluate our understanding of the text as a whole. So this itself, it's already an interpretive claim. It's something someone could disagree with. This just kind of makes it stronger and is emphasizing that connection to, I'm saying something about the meaning of the text and why this thing matters that I just claimed. So aspects that are not mentioned here, right? Cask of Amontillado has a first-person narrator. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland has a third-person narrator, but then a point-of-view character. Right? Alice here is the point-of-view character. Fortunato is not the point-of-view character, or at least not the main point-of-view character. Right? All of these things are not mentioned here in the thesis because they don't have to be. Maybe I said them earlier when I'm introducing general facts about the text. Maybe I'm going to mention them later when I'm doing more close analysis of how things like third person versus first person narration function to support this thesis. But as you said, Odysseus, this is the conclusion, right? This is the main thing that I've decided in my mind is true about this story that is worth presenting to the world for their consideration. Does this language make sense to everybody? More or less. That's a good question.
It's kind of abstract.
Yeah, so right now we're at it's pretty abstract. And I don't want you guys to go too abstract in your writing to the point where it becomes unclear. This, I think, toes the line, right? It's on that border where it's clear enough. It will become clearer once we give the examples, right? So this is the idea. As long as I get long as your claim itself is clear, I know what you're saying, right? Okay, there's a division of sympathy that then closes. All right, abstract, but I know what it means. Is that going to be supported in the rest of the text? Yes, then it's an effective essay. So everything that is written in your essay in some way needs to be there to support the claim you're making in the thesis statement, right? Your central claim. It's all evidence, right? You might have quotes, you might have analysis, you might have specific sub-claims or sub-points. You might extend, right, beyond tone to how tone interacts with some other aspects, right? But your central focus should be on tone, and it should all connect to supporting this claim, ultimately. So once you kind of start with brainstorming, then you get to a thesis, and then you kind of briefly outline how the different points you're going to make connect there, and then you start writing. This would be my recommendation. So I have an explanation here of how this makes sense. Basically, why I said this? Well, at the beginning, we see the third-person narrator sort of introducing Alice's naivete, right? We see these very obvious jokes in the beginning, like she doesn't know what latitude and longitude are. We see her doing very silly things like accidentally insulting the mouse. So this is almost slightly humor at her expense, although the author's tone is more affectionate, right? And this almost makes us sympathize with her more. But there's still some distance. By the end, we see less of those kinds of jokes and more of a sense of the darkness and chaos of this world. Our sympathy with Alice as she tries to deal with all of these things increases. The role of the narrator decreases, I would argue, as the text goes on. And Alice herself also, as we see, perhaps changes, becomes more willful, and perhaps this increases our sympathy with her, and even the narrator's level of sympathy with her. So therefore, the tone or the shift in tone reflects the shift in the story overall and the understanding we have of it as readers. We see something similar happen in The Cask of Amontillado, where we have a first-person narrator who describes Fortunato to us in these very contemptuous terms. So it makes us kind of share in his animosity towards Fortunato. This is maybe hammered home when we meet Fortunato. We see that he's dressed as a fool, we see that he's drunk, we see that he's easily misled. So we are sort of on board with thinking of him negatively, but perhaps as the story goes on, it is the narrator's sort of gleefully sadistic tone or dark humor that I would argue makes us increasingly less sympathetic with the narrator and perhaps more sympathetic with Fortunato. And by the end, perhaps our understanding of the whole situation has changed, right? Perhaps we think Montresor is mad and Fortunato maybe never really did anything in the first place. Again, arguably. And perhaps Montresor's tone at the end where he says, where he seems, we could argue, to express some perhaps regret or denial about how he's feeling. That might clue into us that he's not being totally truthful or he's not fully understanding himself and his own motives there. So there we see the connection between tone and interpretation. One example. If you guys are a little bit lost, it's okay. I'm filming this, so I'm going to send this to you later, as well as the written explanation here, which may be easier to understand. So with this in mind, I sent out those two examples from the Black Cats. What I would like you guys each to do is look through both of these and see if you can find the thesis statement there.
The PDF screenshot?
Yeah, the PDF screenshot. So again, without reading the whole thing, we should be able to look at this, just the first page, the first couple of paragraphs, and identify the thesis statement. What is the central claim, the central argument the author of each of these is making about the Black Cat?